Hey everybody, I'm the Curse, and I'm here to bless you with another build guide. I've played this build more than any other in the game, and I can genuinely tell you it's a lot of fun. It's incredibly versatile. I think it's the most versatile minion build in the game. It's super tanky. You can stack up to 10 to 15k ward before every single boss fight, making it a breeze. It's got great DPS, as you saw in the Julra video. Julra doesn't get to do much. And it does that in a very respectable AoE. So give it a try. And if you're really into glass cannon, YOLO kind of builds, stick around because I've got a special item choice just for you. And so yeah, let's jump in. Irashaimase! So why is this build so strong? Well, you can see in the background a 660 corruption monolith run, and you can see it's a cakewalk. It's a great farming build. You can stack up to 15k ward before every single encounter, every single boss, without any enemies around you. That is a massive advantage. You're going into every single boss fight with over 15k total health. Tier 4 Julra, as you saw, dies before you does any damage. And that's similar with all boss fights. Even at 660 corruption, you can tank Emperor of Corpses' blast. Unless he has multiple damage increases. And since multiplayer is just around the corner, I'll show you how you can make a few small tweaks to this build in the skills section of the build guide in order to add a lot of utility to your party. And I've got one pro tip for multiplayer just for you right now. You must gather your party before venturing forth. Alright, let's go over the skill rotation for the build. Before you go into any fight, if it happens to be a really high damage monolith or a tough boss fight, make sure to top up your ward by casting Rip Blood onto your Bone Golem just like this. Now depending on the fight, you can choose how much you want to top it up. Generally, I wouldn't go beyond 10k just because there's diminishing returns. So once you're happy with the amount of ward that you have, you can cast Dreadshade on your Golem and send them towards the enemy and just cast Rip Blood. Rip Blood is both your source of damage and your source of sustain. Next, for tougher enemies that don't die from a few Rip Bloods, you can use Bone Curse to amplify the damage of your Bone Golem. Don't spam it too much though, because it does slow your Bone Golem down. One of the nodes that it has is to slow it down. Next, Transplant has multiple uses. Obviously, you can use it for mobility. It does also trigger one instance of Rip Blood on your Bone Golem. So it does trigger a little bit of damage as well. And finally, you can use it to teleport on top of a boss and finish them for their last 15 or so percent health. And one last tip I'll give you is never get ahead of your Bone Golem. If you get ahead of him and you're in a tough monolith, there's a high chance you're going to die. So never ever go full Leroy. Now let's go over the skills of the build. Let's start with Bone Golem. Here you want to max out these two skills right here. They are multiplicative damage increases, so you make sure to get them. Especially this one because it takes your Bone Nova chance from 15 to 40%. And then this one triples it when you hit it with Rip Blood. So it basically guarantees a Bone Nova when you hit your Bone Golem. And this one as well is a must-have for the piercing and the extra range. Afterwards, I would spec into more health and armor for the Golem just to make it a little bit tankier. Otherwise, it can get killed pretty easily in certain situations. And then you have some flexibility. The way I like to play it is if I'm running monoliths, I put more points into movement speed. So these two nodes right here. And keep in mind that this node will have greater utility when multiplayer comes out because you'll be speeding up every other minion around you. And also keep in mind that there are some items coming up in the next patch that are going to allow you to have multiple Bone Golems. And so this would be a neat little node to make them faster. But if I'm running Julra, for example, I prefer to spec more into this node for extra damage to make the fight easier. The Temporal Sanctum dungeon has greater density, so you don't need move speed as much. And the extra damage against Julra helps. For Dreadshade, you have to go and get Egoism for always critting. This node is just ridiculous. This node is good, 60% extra damage. This node is also great, preferably if you can get 4 points, it's even better. Try and hit this node as well for 60% extra damage. You also want to get no longer drains health. That's really important just so that you don't end up killing your Bone Golem with your Dreadshade. These nodes, you don't really need attack speed. Your Golem's not going to be attacking. And finally, I like to get the haste. It's very expensive though. You're investing 7 skill points just for the haste. It just helps with the mobility of your Golem. And now, if you're running multiplayer, you can switch around some of the skills to get this node right here. The Dreadshade Aura benefits yourself and allies. This is going to be amazing. If this skill tree doesn't get patched a little bit, this will be really powerful. So to get that one, not only do you want to invest 1 point in it, but you also have to remove all for 1 and go through this side of the skill tree instead. And so unfortunately, you're going to lose a whole bunch of damage on your Bone Golem because you're going to lose the 9 necrotic here and the 10 necrotic as base within the Dreadshade. So yeah, that's Dreadshade. Next, let's look at Transplant. It's pretty straightforward. You want to get the 3 Bone Golem nodes, then reduce the health cost, increase the cast speed so that you can get out of dodge easier, get exactly 1 number of Rip Bloods cast here, because the extra ones don't help. They don't get cast on your Bone Golem. It can only get hit by 1. And then finally, you want to get the kill threshold of 20% here. This is really important just because the last 20% of the boss get endurance. It's much, much harder to do that last bit of damage. And then by getting these extra few detonations, you're just applying a little bit of physical damage reduction. For Bone Curse, you want to beeline into these nodes where you get minion physical damage plus 50%. Not only are you casting Rip Blood on it all the time, but you're also Bone Cursing your poor Golem. But it's okay, they don't mind. And 50% physical damage becomes 150% with this node. So make sure to get these 2 nodes. And then afterwards, you have some flexibility. Get some area of effect. And you can choose to go this way if you need a Mark of Death trigger. The other alternative to get Mark for Death is through idols. So either use the Bone Curse or the idols, but you have to get a Mark for Death trigger somewhere. I'm getting it through idols, so instead I get Armor Shred, and considering that this is a physical damage on hit build, Armor Shred is amazing. And it's important to note that this slow duration of 2 seconds gets applied to your Bone Golem. So as I said, just don't slow it down too much. You don't want to be casting Bone Curse all the time because it will slow you down your clear speed. And now let's go over Rip Blood. I like to max out all the cast speed in these 2 nodes, and I'll explain that a little bit later in the itemization section. And on the left hand side, grab all of the nodes that increase the health granted by the blood orbs, as well as this node. This node is essential to the build. You can't play without it. This is what triggers Bone Nova so many times for your Bone Golem. Now it's important to note that we're running Rip Blood with the unique relic Heart of Eukeros, and that's what makes this build shine. You're essentially trading the health that Rip Blood grants you through the blood orbs for the ward that Heart of Eukeros gives you. It's a beautiful combination. It's a great synergy. The only thing to note is that Rip Blood is by default a physical skill, and for that we need this node right here to convert it to necrotic. Once you have this and the heart, you're good to go. Finally, these 2 nodes over here to trigger Blood Splatter. The reason we like them is that the Blood Splatter itself applies Shred Armor to bosses as well as physical damage reduction. And it might be really handy in the next patch because there are some items coming that will allow you to run 2-3 Bone Golems at the same time. If you're Blood Splattering and hitting all 3 of them, that should be triggering all 3 Bone Novas. So keep an eye out for that. This might be really, really neat to spec into maxing all of these Blood Splatters. And by the way, 120% does indeed mean you're going to be casting 1 or 2 blood splatters depending on the roll of this 20%. So you can cast 2 of them with a single red blood. And now let's say that you're starting a brand new season and you're trying to level a character from 1 to 100. The progression that I would go for is specialize into red blood first, and then specialize into Bone Golem second, and then you can choose between Transplant and Bone Curse depending on if you feel like you need more damage or more mobility. Probably more mobility is nicer. The 4th skill you can specialize into is Dreadshade. And finally, the 5th one is whatever you have left over from these 2. In terms of skill progression, yeah, max out this side of the Bone Golem tree as fast as you can. Red Blood, max out your mana reduction so that you can cast it indefinitely as early as you can. Get your Marrow Drinker as soon as you feel like your Bone Golem's damage is sufficient. And that's pretty much it. Everything else is fairly self-explanatory. Once you get Dreadshade, you want to be beelining into here and here. It's pretty straightforward. Now let's go through the passive choices for the build. You probably already noticed that Intelligence scales the damage and the tankiness of your Bone Golem, and then it gives us ward retention as well. And finally, it also increases the healing that Red Blood provides to us. And healing for Red Blood translates to extra ward. So Intelligence is a really strong attribute to scale for this build. You want to get as much of it as possible. That's why we maxed this node right here. We also maxed ward retention right here. Vitality for our hero and increased minion health for the Bone Golem is an amazing node. And that's the base class. For Lich, we've put 10 points for extra intelligence. And then everything else is in the Necromancer skill tree. You need to get 10 points among these first few nodes to get to this one. And the best way to do that is to put 5 into Grave Thorns. This is a decent node. It's solid. You want to max out Mortal Tether. It basically makes it so you don't need to put too much itemization into minion health. 8 points into Aegis Fall. 200% armor shred is great. We do a lot of physical damage. Cast speed for our hero. That's all we need from this node. 20% cast speed. And here we have Life Leech, as well as critical strike chance for the minion. More intelligence. Max this one if you can. Critical strike multiplier for your minion. Here we have more damage. Excellent to max out. And this is just a value point to get to here, where you get tankiness for the hero through vitality, but also 16% minion all resistances. And there aren't very many sources of resistances for the minion, so please make sure to get this one. And finally, we have Rite of Undeath as well. You can utilize this one to max out your necrotic and elemental resistances, but keep in mind that once you have all of them maxed, this is diminishing returns. The minion doesn't deal too much elemental damage, and it does get necrotic damage through Dreadshade, but it does more physical damage than necrotic damage. Don't get anything that gives minion attack speed or minion cast speed. Your minion isn't attacking it, and it isn't casting either. You're triggering their damage through your red blood. That's it for the passives. And now for the best part of any ARPG, the itemization. So I'll start with idols. I'm using Throne of Ambition just to get a little bit of extra tankiness in boss fights. And then for idols, I'm just running HP idols everywhere and maxing out my Fizz Res. This one also has a source of Mark for Death on head for my minion. And so this is pretty much my only source of Mark for Death, and it's quite sufficient. And now in terms of items, I'll start with the one linchpin of an item for the entire build, without which the build just doesn't reach its full potential. And that is the Heart of Eucharos. I love this item. It's such a great addition to the game. It can convert your health to ward. It makes it so that your cast speed attribute all of a sudden can now not only boost your damage, but also boost your tankiness. Anytime you can make an attribute increase both your damage and your tankiness, it makes the game so much easier, because then you can only just spec into that attribute and get everything out of it. So this item makes itemization much clearer for you. And then it gives +1 to necrotic and elemental spells, strength, which is really good because there aren't very many ways in which you can gain damage mitigation for ward. and armor is one of them. So 13 strength is 52% armor boost, which is very significant. And also it gives increased cast speed. It's perfect. You can see I've slotted it with a tier 7 cast speed as well, so I got lucky on that roll. And the way to farm the item is by killing the boss at the end of the Reign of Dragons monolith. It's the Emperor of Corpses. In fact, I'm working on a video of a compilation of Emperor of Corpses kills, just to show you what kind of drop rates he gives you for Twisted Heart of Kairos. And there's a staff that he drops and a really cool shield as well. So if you're interested in that, keep an eye out for the video. And that's the most core item for this build. Twisted Heart of Kairos. Next, let's talk about weapon choice. I'll give you 3 weapon choices here to think about. What I'm running right now is a Scepter plus a Focus. The Focus is pretty straightforward. This is the tankiest Focus you can get. And of course, more cast speed. Ice Scepter, you want cast speed. You want the suffixes that give your minion spell and physical damage. You can choose between tier 7 minion damage or tier 7 cast speed for this, if you can get that. And -3 mana cost doesn't hurt either. You certainly want to choose a Scepter over a Wand, just because wands cannot spawn with those suffixes. They cannot give your minion extra damage. The second choice I could give you is Reach of the Grave, which is a wand that gives minion spell damage by default, as well as Minion Leech, which is quite nice for survivability. You just have to get 1 LP to get your cast speed in there. And the third choice is a Staff, and it's a bit more of a YOLO choice. This is what I was referring to at the beginning of the video. You want to get the right suffixes, and then you really need cast speed on your prefixes. Unfortunately, I don't have that in this staff. So it's quite tricky to get all 3 of these with a tier 7 for one of them. But if you can get that, that's a really powerful staff. So that's it for weapons. Next, I'll cover the helmet. You have to use a Profane Mask base item type. I would choose that over the Summon Bone Golem skills as well. The adaptive damage for minion spells is just too powerful. And then Summon Bone Golem with the extra minion armor is quite handy for survivability. This is the best in slot amulet. Nothing to talk about here. Chest armor, I've opted for full survivability plus as much intel as possible. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, intelligence scales this build greatly. So basically you just want int and cast speed in every single item on your build, as well as maybe minion damage here and there, minion health occasionally. But that's it for your prefixes. Your prefixes choices are very straightforward for this build. The suffixes are, as per usual, max your resistances, max your critical strike avoidance, and then get tons and tons of health. Also armor, spec into armor, at least to some extent, get 30 to 40% reduction. Here's an alternative body armor choice, again the YOLO kind of choice. You have to keep in mind that Summon Skeleton and Summon Wrath, even if you don't have those skills, doesn't matter. The increased minion damage boosts your Bone Golem's damage significantly. And then belt, minion health, minion damage, suffixes that you want. Hybrid health is great here. Here's a great ring, tier 7 intelligence, and then tier 7 minion damage with int on this side. Preferably it should be a turquoise ring as well. For gloves, I have another cast speed, intelligence, hybrid health, apply frailty on hit gloves. These are phenomenal. A really good alternative is Julra's Obsession for the 10 adaptive spell damage. However, they don't provide as much survivability, and it's hard to get cast speed in them as well. I'm trying to get cast speed, but it's not happening for me. For boots, I have armor, move speed, and some int and attunement. And that's it for the items. And now let's go over the blessings real quick. The most important is shred physical resistance on hit. Most of our damage is physical damage. And then we want to get some armor, all resistances, or crit strike avoid, health, ward per second. It's pretty straightforward. Now check out how this build performs in the Lightless Arbor boss phase 1. If you recall from my Paladin Manifest Armor build guide, that build struggles with this fight. The sustain options for that build cannot carry it through this fight. However, with the Bone Golem Necro, it's a breeze. You can see we just pre-buff to 9k ward, and we can take any number of meteors we want because we can heal through them, and we can keep buffing our ward without any enemies around. This is why this build is so strong. The fact that you can just pre-buff ward whenever you're going into a tough encounter makes the game a lot easier. So try it out and get excited about 0.9 because there are a lot of changes coming for the Bone Golem. I mentioned some of the item changes that are coming up, but there are also skin changes for Bone Golem. It's gonna be a lot cooler and we'll see what else. And as I'm wrapping up, I really want to thank everybody who watched my first video. I got a few subscribers, so thanks to all of you. I really appreciate it. For my next build guide, I'm thinking about a Lich build, and this one's going to be quite unique. I hope you end up enjoying it as much as I am enjoying building it up right now. If you're curious about my Paladin Manifest Armor Smite build, check out the link at the end of the video. I'll make sure to embed it. Thanks for watching, and take it easy. Gochiso samadeshita.